First step on your cuff is to sew it into a tube. And so you will put it right sides together, sew it into a tube. And then, because I am making this for a small child, I actually decided to double top stitch the seam shut. So I stitched one down one side and back up the other, much like with sewing down into the sleeve, so that I could get that stitched flat to reduce some bulk on this particular jacket. And then when you've got that sewn into a tube, the seam finished the way that you want it to be finished, you now fold that wrong sides together. And so you literally fold the seam right in half on itself, and then fold the cuff back around and bring those cut edges up together, and that cuff now will get sewn into the sleeve of your jacket. Okay? In order to make sure that you distribute the bulk evenly, if you will fold it in half from seam to the other side and just mark a pin, put a pin in the other side of that cuff, I've now got it marked halfway, and it will help to distribute the extra fabric from the sleeve, because the sleeve is going to be bigger than this. I'm going to have to stretch this to fit the cuff onto the sleeve, and it'll help to make sure that I stretch evenly, fitting that around. So I get my jacket. If you look at these two, you can see the cuff is quite a bit smaller than the sleeve. It makes sense then that it will make my life easier if, when I sew this, I put the cuff down inside the sleeve, and that's why I pulled the sleeve inside out. If I set my cuff down inside my sleeve, then I'm putting the smaller one inside the larger one, and I don't have to stretch it quite so far in order to get it to fit. And so line up those seam allowances, got my underarm sleeve seam and my cuff sleeve seam there, and pin them together. And then I mark my halfway point. And I've done the same thing with my cuff and with my sleeve, so I have a pin in my sleeve and a pin in my cuff. And that matches up halfway. Okay. And then you pull and stretch until the cuff itself matches the sleeve. And you can take advantage of your cork board down there and pull this out and pin it, or work with the buddy, pull it out and hold it, and then pin it while somebody's holding it, so you've got it stretched out, and get it pinned evenly while it's being stretched. Okay, so you can see that I've got the cuff pinned into the inside of the shirt, and I've got little spots that show that where that ease is going to be stretched into that. And then I'm going to put this under the sewing machine. Because of the size of this, it's going to be easier for me to sew inside the circle, much like as you put in a sleeve and you set in a sleeve. So I'm going to start there at the seam allowance, drop my needle, and then you need to pull as you're sewing and stretch as you sew in order to have that cuff be long enough to fit onto the band. And so this becomes a sew for about an inch, rotate the cuff and the band from the back of the sewing machine towards the front, pull the fabric again, get it stretched so that the cuff is as big as the bottom of the sleeve, and continue sewing until you get to your finger again. Bring the fabric from the back of the machine, bring it around forward, hold on, pull, give it a stretch, and continue that process. If you try to just sew around in one step and in a circle, I promise you, you will get tucks, and it will not be a pleasant experience. So be sure you take your time and just go in short little segments from pin to pin to pin, remembering that you're pulling the fabric from the back of the machine, bringing it forward. And you notice I have one hand behind the presser foot and one hand in front of the presser foot as I sew. That helps me to be able to stretch and to pull. A common mistake that people make when they're doing this is they actually try to pull or push the fabric through. All you are doing is stretching the fabric to make all the pieces the same length. You are still letting the feed dogs in the sewing machine do the work of feeding the fabric through at the right pace. If you try to push or pull that fabric through, you will risk breaking your needle as you're sewing. And so you have to just apply the pressure as you sew, but allow the machine to feed the fabric. Again, if you are sewing with a fabric that does not have any give, you may have had to put a little bit an ease stitch in the bottom of that sleeve and actually ease the sleeve to fit the band, because the band will not stretch to fit the sleeve. So it depends on your fabric, if you have ease or not, whether or not you can stretch that band onto it. If you have no ease, you will probably have to ease the sleeve. And when you get around, you can backstitch that fabric or backstitch at the end. And then you are going to simply reach up inside the sleeve, pull the cuff out, make sure that you don't have any tucks or any puckers, that it's just eased on there evenly. And then again, you can take your hem gauge, measure the width of your band, and make sure that you stay the same width, that you don't have wide points or narrow points, fats or skinnies. And then you are going to trim and grade your band, the cuff, the very same way we trim and graded the band. And so this one I have already done. I've got my sleeve trimmed to just over 1/4 inch, the first part of the band trimmed to just under 1/4 inch. The inside of the band I left at 5/8 inch, so that I can now welt the seam of the band there. Okay. If your cuff is big enough, you can actually slide this now over the arm of the sewing machine and sew in a circle that type of way, heading around. This one is a little bit smaller, and so I am going to have to actually reach up inside and stitch that without being able to go over the edge of the cuff. But it's pinned in the same direction, will become welted the same direction, and be done just exactly like the band was on the bottom of the jacket. So that will become welted. And then your cuffs will be done and be completed, and we're ready to work on your hood. All right, so I've taken the wide plate off, and I'm ready to stitch that band coming around. The nice thing about just sliding the band onto the sewing machine is it does kind of stretch it as you go. It's being stretched. So I don't have to necessarily hold in front and behind like I was, because the machine itself is actually stretching it. Notice this time when I welted, I put my pins on the outside. You can put them on the outside as you pin it, or you can put it on the inside like I did when I did the waistband. Like I said earlier, try a little bit each way and see which you prefer. As I welt this around, I'm going to sew just right to where I stitched and stop so they just meet each other. And then pull that out, and those threads will pull through and tie a knot. And then you can see that welts and looks just like the band did. And then the same thing has got to happen. You will reach up inside of here and trim that seam down so that you don't have this little flippy floppy piece of fabric in there. And you will trim that band, trim that seam, the welt seam, the same way that we trimmed the others. And then your cuffs will be done, and they will be completed.